welcome and thank you for checking in with us on this video as we discuss the idea of vocation. A lot of people in the world, young and old, we have this innate desire and we seek to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. And we seek to make a difference in the lives of others. And there are organizations, there are businesses, there are grassroots movements and ministries, all sorts of things out there that attempt to help us accomplish this goal. But even with these helps, many of us flounder when it comes to finding actual real life ways to accomplish these goals that we have. And so a part of this conversation, one of the goals of this conversation is to discuss the word vocation and what it means and also what it doesn't mean as a way to maybe use this word vocation and this idea as a way to understand how we might already actually be accomplishing this goal in our everyday lives. So my name's Andrew, and I'm joined with a handful of members, colleagues, and brothers and sisters in Christ from our Chapel of the Cross community here in St. Peter's. Chad and James and Jackie and Julia. So welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
Thanks.
So we're going to start with just a simple question. Jackie, I'm going to throw it to you first. And then Julia, feel free to follow up with her as she finishes. How would you, Jackie, explain this word vocation as you understand it?
Well, first of all, I would say that probably my first real introduction to the word was when I was 21, fresh out of college, and took a teaching job in a Catholic school. And I taught side by side with nuns. And so they talked quite a bit about their vocation and, you know, the fact that they had given their life to a religious order and that this was their calling. So that was my first real association with the word. And then as I matured as a person and spiritually, I came to know it more as God's calling. What is God calling everyone to do, so to speak? Or in the case of LCMS, he's calling a pastor to a congregation. He's calling a teacher. You know, we hear that a lot. Personally, I think vocation is kind of a fancy term for just looking at what I want to do and am charged to do as a faithful member of the church. So.
Julia, you want to add on to that?
Sure. I would have to agree with Jackie. You know, that's about when I was 18. That's about when I heard the word vocation. My family had not really intended to send me to college. At that time, my brother pushed for it and said, you know, it was important for me to go. So they said, okay, then this is where you're going to go. So then I had to kind of think about what I wanted to do. So I was a candy striper at a hospital and was interested in occupational therapy. But the person that was showing me how to do their vocation was not very stimulating. And instead an SLP came over and said, hey, why don't you come watch me? So so I did. And that was it for me. I knew from that moment that was definitely my calling. And I've used being a speech language pathologist as a way to work with families, and that's really the part that I enjoy the most. I work with the students, but then the family support is there that I can then follow up through. And I've had a lot of changes in my career right now that is allowing me to do more of God's work in that way, because it's a lot more hands-on right now with families than I've ever been.
Very good. So Chad, I know that you have done some study, some teaching, some writing, a good deal of work on this idea of vocation. And I guess as a way to maybe wrap up this first question, I want to throw it to you. Say, what might you add to this understanding of vocation as you understand it through your studies?
Sure. So Jackie's comments about just hearing from the way that the nuns talked around her, the use of the term vocation has always had that sense in a narrow religious, strictly religious context. We've inherited it from Catholicism in just that sense, talking about priests and nuns and monks and those who have a unique role of service in the church. But then following on Julia's talk, you know, thinking about what her career is going to be, I would say probably most of the people listening to this would use vocation in that way. We would make it synonymous with job. You know, what's my job? And then Luther, you know, he comes along 500 years ago and kind of blows up the term altogether and makes it really this just big expansive bucket into which just gobs and gobs of roles fit, and that we all have multiple roles at any given time, right? So all of us here are people who have careers, right? We've got church workers, we've got lay people, teachers, or people that work with kids in the school system. You know, Julia's got a very specific job where she's doing speech pathology. And my job is unique, working for Lutheran Hour. I'm a pastor, but I don't run a church, so that's not a very traditional role of a pastor. But beyond thinking about our careers and our jobs, we can talk about the fact that we're all daughters and sons, we're all parents, we're all spouses, we're all citizens, which is a unique role. Yeah, we've all got our careers, which is valid, and then we've all got our membership in the church. And so the way Luther talked about it, he had these four spaces or realms that he talked about: the church, our place of work, essentially, as being one of them, the state, which is kind of our civic commitments, and the home, our family. And then sometimes he would add on, you know, a generic kind of catch-all for everything that didn't fit those categories and just say, we're all neighbors to other people in the world, following the story of the Good Samaritan. So I love the way that he blows it up, because then we can start thinking about all of our different roles in ways that are really meaningful.
Good. So vocation really seems to be this overarching, a very wide understanding of, you know, all the callings that we have from God and the way we express them in this world. And I think one of the things that we're all facing face-to-face, that we've come very face-to-face with in the last month or so, is that this is not a static list, that we're not born with this list of this is your vocation, or these are your vocations, and you do them until you die, you know. And as I remember growing up, you know, I prioritized these vocations of being a son and a brother and a student. And while now in my 30s, I still continue in various ways to hold those vocations, still learning as a student, still a son, still a brother. But as I got into adulthood, I took on some new vocations, and my vocation as a son became secondary to my vocation as a husband, and then further as a father to my own children. And I'm gonna call on James here. I'm gonna maybe pick on James. You know, as we think of this idea that vocation is not static, would you mind sharing with us maybe a little bit of how you have come face to face with how vocations shift based on circumstance, especially here in this last month and a half?
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking of as you were talking is that we, you know, understanding vocation as, you know, kind of our roles and our various relationships with people in our lives is helpful. And one of the things that struck me was a lot of times when we talk about the vocations that we have, those roles and relationships, either we have, you know, kind of no say in them. You know, I'm my parents' son. I didn't have any way to prepare for that. I just was, and I always have been. But some of our, you know, our vocations, even when they're changing, we have time to prepare for that. So like when you're a new parent and you're preparing for, you know, welcoming a son or daughter into the world, you've got about 9 months lead time generally to wrap your head around what this is going to look like. Same thing on the outside, when, you know, your kids are hitting that, you know, 17, 18-year-old phase and they're ending college, you know, there's going to be some kind of a transition. And then the last 2 months, you know, you're still a parent, you're still a father when your kids run off to college or they leave the house. You've got time to prepare for that. But in the last 2 months, it's been kind of the reverse, where, you know, I had no chance, no one did really, to prepare for what does it mean, you know, my vocation as a father, what's that going to look like, you know, mid-March versus beginning of March? Because the beginning of March, you know, I was pretty comfortable in the schedule I had at work and coming home and my role as dad, picking the kids up from school and helping them with homework for about half an hour each day and playing with them, to, you know, the end of March where it's, you know, now I'm working from home and I've got my 3 kids with me at the same time, and they're preschool, 3rd grade and 5th grade. And so now I've got 3 hours of teaching to do with them every day, on top of, you know, my vocation as a pastor and trying to work out all of that. So it was, actually the best word, it was confusing, difficult. I think the first couple weeks that making that transition to, you know, I was still a dad after, just like I was a dad before, but being dad looked very differently when they weren't with me all the time and I was trying to get my stuff done as well as their stuff. And same thing with the vocation as a pastor. You know, I'm still a pastor now. I was still a pastor before, but my role has shifted. You know, now everything is online and I'm doing, you know, daily video devotions. I did a baptism right at the start of this where there was no congregation. It was just the family and we were in the sanctuary, and it was only about 12 of us. Did a wedding, Jackie's daughter, a couple weeks back, or a week or so ago, and same kind of thing. We didn't even go into the church. We just stood outside on the cross, and praise God, we had a beautiful day. But, you know, it was parents and Spencer's brothers, family, and everybody was about 8 to 10 feet away from each other as we did this wedding. And then we had a bunch of guests who had come as a surprise and did like a little car parade in front of them. And, you know, that was something I never could have even imagined 2 months ago. So.
Or not being able to give a congratulatory handshake or a hug. It was just so bizarre.
Yeah, very different.
Julia, I know you've got children, you know, spanning a little bit broader than James has at home. But sure. How have you seen maybe a shift in how God is calling you to serve your family and complete your job in this change here's last month?
Okay, so I have a 3-year-old that's a preschooler then, and she'll be 4 here in a few months. I've got a 8-year-old son. He's 2nd grade, and then I just have a brand new 14-year-old who's the queen of the group. So, and then I've got my husband. He's currently home as well. He is also in the teaching profession, and so he's at home as well. So we're all together, and we call ourselves Team Crutchfield. So the goal is to you know, we're taking it one day at a time because the shift has really changed. Before we were quarantined, I had a very specific schedule for everyone as far as, you know, dropping off kids at school, picking up, that type of thing, homework, when to do that type of stuff, versus free time, you know, and of course, you know, the majority of our time on Sunday was spending it at church with Sunday school and attending the service. And that's all blurred together now. So the definite line that we had has just crossed in a way that it was uncomfortable at first, but we've kind of made like this new normal. You know, we established a new schedule for the kiddos, and my husband and I laugh at the end of the day when we go to bed at midnight after we've completed our work, because we've been together the whole day in the house, but we haven't seen each other because we're constantly shifting through who's homeschooling who, and you know, we're trying to stimulate the children in a way that it's beneficial, and they're not just sitting there watching a screen, which is not helpful. So it's been different. During the week seems to go pretty well. The weekends are less structured, still like they typically were. And then we're, you know, worshiping from home, which is a whole new experience for us. Instead of going to church, we're doing it all online, and we sit together and we, you know, enjoy that time together as best as possible without the kids running away or the dog coming in and barking and, you know, all that type of stuff. So the kids are interesting to watch because my 3-year-old is loving it. You know, she thinks it's great. She doesn't really understand why we're home. And it's been different to parent her, like when we do go out on the trail behind our house and there are people there, you know, she's made comments like, look, it's a person. And it's like, yeah, you know, there are still people around. You know, or if she sees a child, she's been overly friendly, like, oh, hi, you know, and she just tries to start a conversation, and we have to then remind her to keep her appropriate distance for safety reasons, and coming up with a sensitive way to explain that to her without her becoming upset and, you know, making it worse, because we don't want to have long-lasting effects of this on her as she continues her development, and she's, you know, starting to learn how to interact with people. And so this is, you know, just different, and it's not the kind of parenting we thought we'd be doing. My 8-year-old is the one that's struggling the most. He's too young to be able to ignore it. You know, he knows stuff's going on, but he's not old enough to quite grasp the magnitude of it. And has made comments like, well, you know, this is an over exaggeration, you know, why are we all staying home? And it's like, well, you know, buddy, let's talk about this. You know, while you're worried about your Amazon shipment being delayed for your Lego guys, you know, there's people in hospitals that are fighting for their lives, but, you know, he can't fathom that. So that's been a different shift for him, in addition to not having that social outlet that he's used to at school, and being forced to have his parents all of a sudden be his teachers and his principal, you know, in addition to cutting hair, which is not going super awesome. So, you know, not my vocation calling. So, you know, it's a day by day with him, and we continue to pray with him that he gets some kind of normalcy through this. Whereas my 14-year-old, I thought she'd be more upset by it, but she seems perfectly fine to be locked in her room day after day, hour after hour, with nobody bothering her. So,
fair enough.
You know,
fair enough.
getting her out is a little bit tricky. And sometimes we say, okay, it's mandatory that you come spend time with us or do this activity with us. And then other times we create breaks for her, because we realize that being a teenager locked with your parents for eternally is not so easy. So, and then, you know, the husband-wife relationship is a little bit different too. You know, the rules have changed. I mean, I look at him and he's my partner in crime on how to pull this off. And so, but by the end of the day, we can still, you know, I'm up late working on work that I didn't get done during the day because I'm feeding children countless hours or teaching or doing whatever I need, and he is too. And then we get up and do it all over again.
Yep, it's a new day to serve the Lord in that way.
It
Jackie,
sure is.
Jackie, just real briefly, you know, your children are older, but you're a person who's very involved. You've got your hands in a lot of things. You're serving in various roles and capacities. How have you seen a vocational shift, if at all, in your life with you and your husband at home, and the way that you're both engaged in the community?
Well, just as we are right now, everything is on a screen, talking to people. I've had a screeching halt to a lot of things I'm involved with at church, because me and my little posse of women at church, we're usually planning a fellowship type of activity to bring everybody together and grow in, and we can't do that right now. It's on pause. So I think a lot of us have taken on the role of calling shut-ins, praying for them, just making sure they're not alone. That's become a new ministry. And I've really as a wife and a mother, seen my prayer life change. While as a mother, you're always, and a wife, you're always praying for your spouse, your children. It's become different types of prayers. You pray about their employment, that it's not taken away, their livelihood, the stress they're under right now, their health. My daughter is in the healthcare profession, so I have to, worry that she's going to be exposed. So different types of worries have come about, but I have to say through this, I have become more faithful in my prayer life and in my studies. So that's been a blessing. But staying connected with the community is definitely a challenge right now.
Just for the sake of time, let's, I guess I'll throw this, well, maybe I'll just kind of let anybody chime in as they want to. One of the key gleanings that I've taken from my different study and reading in vocation is this idea that one way we can understand our vocation is as a mask of God. That when we are fulfilling a vocation, God is using us to love our neighbor, whether that's our family member, our literal neighbor, or the people that God has put in our midst. And so I guess maybe Chad or James, or if anybody else wants to chime in, how might understanding that your life is really spent as a mask of God, how might that help you understand the tasks, I guess, that are set before you in these interesting times, and then moving forward out of this?
Sure. Yeah, I'll jump in. I'll just say two things to try to leave some space for James. I think following your lead with that idea, masks of God, right? That essentially God wears us as a mask, that he's at work behind us or through us. There's great analogies, great ways to narrate this, that God is somehow reaching down through heaven, down from heaven through us, and using our actions, our hands, our feet, our mouths, our compassion, our service, and so on to care for not just other human beings, but for all of creation, going back to the responsibilities he gave us in the garden. But then the other thing, like if you think of yourself and the things you do, even the most mundane and ordinary, like we've got a 2-year-old, we're still changing diapers. It's kind of nasty these days, but you do it over and over again, because I'm called to, as dad to my daughter, to be able to think of that, mundane, ordinary, and gross, as a way that I'm being invited to participate in something that's bigger than me, part of something that's bigger than myself, and do something that's meaningful and fulfilling, right? I know that this matters. If I can expand that out from, thinking about just the ordinary of parenthood to the ordinary of all these other sorts of things I do in the rest of my life, it helps me understand life in such a way that I think maybe right now, while we're struggling in the midst of this pandemic, some of us, however busy we are, don't feel like we're doing enough, right? But if God's at work through us in the things that we actually are doing, and one of the things we're called to do is serve our neighbor, and staying at home is one of the orders that we're under, God through Christ is actually making that enough, right? Because I'm serving my neighbor by staying away or checking in via, these great technologies that we have right now, and thank God for them. That Jackie's able to make those calls, for example, and Julie's able to connect online, and all the rest of us doing the same in cases like this, and for our work, and to connect with family otherwise. Just two thoughts that kind of all run together, but James, take it away, man.
Yeah, I think the only, I guess, concluding thought I could add is that when it comes to vocation, I think a lot of times we have a tendency to think of, a hierarchy of vocation, that some vocations are more important than others. So the example that I was thinking of the other day was Mike Rowe, if you remember when he was doing the Dirty Jobs episodes a couple of years back. That was a fascinating show to me just by itself, but his commentary was really, really fascinating because, you know, the way he talked about these jobs that most of us would not want, and that I think many people, even if they wouldn't necessarily admit to it, would look down on that and say, that's not the job that I want. That's not the job I'd want for my kid. He did a fantastic job of demonstrating just how critical and important and fulfilling those jobs could be. And so, you know, taking that out of just the realm of jobs, when we look at our vocations, we make a hierarchy of vocations too. You know, parents are more important than kids. You know, however we delineate that, but I think the thing I appreciate biblically when it comes to vocation is that there isn't a hierarchy. It's all a service to our neighbor and God working through us in that. And you look at the Gospels, you know, a lot of times when Jesus was butting heads with his disciples, it was kind of around that issue of what's really important here. Is it the fact that, you know, I'm the master and you're the students, or the fact that I have an opportunity to serve you, or you have an opportunity to serve me? And I think for me, you know, in that first couple weeks, that was a real struggle I had, because I felt like I wasn't able to fulfill my vocation as dad very well. I wasn't able to fulfill my vocation as pastor very well, because all of those things changed. And, you know, in the subsequent weeks, you know, being able to have some time to really wrestle with this idea. And like Chad, you said, understanding that, hey, this time when I'm away from what I would consider my normal vocations, or my what they normally look like, is still, you know, God working through me to serve my neighbor, even though that's not the first place my mind goes when I think of this state right now. So
absolutely, we've got a great opportunity to be a mask of God, to be the hands and feet of Jesus, to use maybe a term that's a bit more familiar for some of you, both as we're here in isolation and as over the next weeks and months we transition back into a society that includes some interaction with one another and some different ways for service. So thank you very much for your thoughts today as we kind of explore this idea of vocation and share a little bit about how we understand it in our lives and in our households, and how this pandemic has maybe caused us to wrestle with what God is calling us to do and how he's calling it to do it. And it's my prayer that it's a blessing to those of you who are watching, that this conversation is helpful for you, and for those of us here as well as those watching, that this is a beneficial conversation moving back into society, back into life that maybe looks a little bit more like it did 3 months ago, and that we would serve the Lord joyfully, and that we would gladly answer that call to love our neighbor on his behalf. So thank you very much for watching, and thank you, panel, for joining us and sharing your thoughts. I appreciate it.